Good afternoon. Oh, volume again. Sorry. Such an amateur podcaster. I need production assistance. There we go. That should be good. Yeah, that is good. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. It's 1:40 p.m. Sunday, the 24th of August, and tomorrow I go to San Jose, and then Tuesday morning I fly out to Panama to spend, I guess, including the day I arrive and the day I leave, it'll be about 7 days in Panama. And I'll be staying with my friend Jim and his wife Yoshi. And Rosemary and I stayed with them about a year ago. It was in their city residence. They have a country residence as well. So this one will be up in the country. You know what they said to me? I hope you don't get bored up here. I went and I said to my wife, do they not know where we live? I mean, how many times have I told them? You know, what they mean is there's no convenience stores. There's, you can't dart out to a Starbucks and mingle with people and stuff like that. But that's been my life for a decade now. So I'm well and accustomed to it. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room. How about that new intro? I did that with AI video generation. And I like it quite a bit. So that's the new intro to the Talamanca Review. It's been about 1.5 2 years I've been doing the Talamanca Review. So it was time for a new intro, and there it is, and I love it. Now today I'm going to do an old-time storytelling podcast, similar to something like a simple ghost story, but this one is different. Some of you will know who I'm talking about if you go all the way back to Revolution Radio with me. And it has to do, this story today has to do with an individual who I allowed to come over here. Now, I've gone through many phases over here. Okay, so let me start there. In the beginning, I thought I was going to do a little eco-village. But there's such a learning curve to living here, and there's such an adjustment curve. And what Brandon and I have noticed over the years is that, number one, it's much easier for Canadians than it is for Americans. Americans have a tremendously difficult time adjusting to new environments. It's almost like they expect the environment to adjust to them. And this is not the way to travel, because you're casually insulting your host nation the whole time you're here. Now, at an objective level, 99% of the time, the American complaint is correct if the basis of the complaint is efficiency, productivity, gratitude, all the things you expect, right? In a normal exchange, in a normally functioning society. They're factually correct. But what I tell everybody who comes over here is everything evens out over time. You just have to be here long enough. And being North Americans, the first thing that we notice when we're abroad is what's missing, or what is not the same as, or not as good as the North American experience. It takes longer for us to see what's good. I might be an exception to this rule, but I think it has to do with my unique upbringing, my unique life journey, and all of those sorts of things, which makes me a little bit different than the average bear. I'm extremely adaptable. If you told me I had to go live in Siberia tomorrow and you showed up in 5 years, I'd have myself all rigged out. I'd have a stone fireplace built. I'd figured out my hunting routes, how to get my meat, and all of these sorts of things. Oh, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this. I think I did, but in case I did not, let me say this. After 16 years of vegetarianism, I have switched over to the carnivore diet. And after 2 weeks, I feel fantastic. My belly, I've lost an inch on my waist already. And it's not like you're watching what you eat. I ate a lot of chicken. I ate a lot of pork. I ate a lot of beef and a lot of eggs. And this idea was given to me by Larry, who was just here, and he went carnivore 5 years ago and healed up a whole bunch of health ailments that he had, and has the figure of like an 18-year-old. Larry is about 6'4", and he's probably about 180 pounds, which is how much you would weigh when you're 6'4", when you're between 18 and 25, and then you would just get gradually bigger after that, right? And I didn't just take this at face value. I did all of my own research. And this has nothing to do with the podcast I had intended today. But you know what? I'm not going to be so concerned about the 50-minute time limit. I'm just going to sit here and talk and do the Talamanca review as I want to do it. So there you go. So I started to research the carnivore diet, and then I had to admit to myself that as clever as I think I am, I had been duped. Okay? And Larry pointed this out. He said, basically, you figured out almost every inversion in society: law, medicine, ownership through this legal person, education. Everything is inverted. It's doing the opposite of what it is supposed to do. And he looked at me and he said, Bruce, why do you think the Dietary Council from the food and medical authorities in the Western system would be any different? And I thought about it and I went, yeah, he's right. And so now I just eat meat. And I'll tell you what, when you just eat meat, it's actually cheaper than a full-form diet. It actually costs more now to live healthy vegetarian than it does carnivore. Your whole body changes on the carnivore diet. And I hope I'm not offending anybody. I know a lot of my listeners were vegetarians. I know a lot of spiritual teachers advocate that in the Eastern systems, advocate that their students be vegetarian to receive initiation and instruction. And I respect that. And if you're under spiritual tutelage and you have a teacher, a spiritual instructor in a system that you want to advance in, and they tell you to be vegetarian out of respect to them. Okay? Do not violate the rules. But for the rest of us finding our own way in life, it was very surprising for me to learn that everything I thought I knew about diet was complete bullshit. That the human body was designed to eat copious amounts of meat and animal products. And not just you don't even want, on the carnivore diet, you're not even looking for the lean meat. You're looking for the fattiest meat. The fat is the key to our health. The literal and diametric opposite of everything we've been told since about 1970 onward, when our governments started getting very interested in our diets. It's the fat. So when you go and you buy hamburger, you don't buy lean ground. You buy the basic with the most fat in it, and you eat the fat. And the fat does not clog up your arteries. It does not produce heart disease. Everything we've been told is a lie. Your whole system cleans up. I used to have like the beginning of I would say some kind of acid reflux going on. You could see it when I would podcast. I would sort of catch gas in my throat. That was bread, that was pasta, that was rice, that was beans. I existed on pretty much an entirely fiber diet. Now, here's a simple litmus test for what your body needs. If you put it in your body and nothing comes out right away, your body's using it. Okay? If you put something into your body and something is leaving shortly, like within 4 or 6 hours, that's the waste of the food that you put in your body. That's all the fiber. That's the stuff that the human stomach can't digest. A cow's stomach can digest it. A deer or a moose can digest it. A buffalo can digest it. A horse can digest it. But all of these mammals are given complex stomach systems or multiple stomachs that allow them to digest high fiber material, like the leaves off of trees, like grass, like all of that stuff. It's really kind of amazing when you think about it. So I'm on an all-meat diet now. And I'm very happy with it. I may adjust my diet in the future. I don't know. I can still eat, on this diet, you can still eat dairy, right? So you can still eat cheese. You can still eat yogurt as long as the yogurt doesn't have a lot of sugar in it. They recommend plain Greek yogurt, the high fat one. Yeah, it's amazing. So fat doesn't make you fat. It's all the chemicals and the stuff. It's all the chemicals and the stuff in the food that makes you fat. That's why poor people are fatter, because they eat the lowest quality food. That's why there's an obesity epidemic in America, a diabetes epidemic in America. It's all the high carb processed foods. And as an added bonus, like the pork and the chicken you get in Costa Rica is phenomenal. The beef, because they mainly have Brahman cows here, it's a little bit worse. It's tougher. But it is what it is, right? You just eat it. But there's not a lot of doping of the animals over here. And as this, as I get into this diet, I'm going to start buying whole animals and butchering, right? Which some of you might find a little disturbing, but I mean, that's life, right? And then there's that overall economics of the whole thing, And I mean, I can't articulate it any better than Ted Nugent. So let's listen to him.
If you really want to kill the most things, be a vegan. Because the farmers who protect your beans kill everything. I kill one animal per arrow. In order to grow tofu, you have to kill every ground squirrel, every vole, every shrew, every snake, every turtle, every frog, every bird, every rabbit, anything that gets in that bean field, so you can have a tofu salad and not be responsible for any death.
That's a bit famous now. I think Ted originally said that on the Joe Rogan podcast. Of course, I don't think it's entirely accurate, but there's even more to it than that. Research has shown that even plants suffer when you kill them. There's a kind of a psychic scream they let off if you're filming them with a ultraviolet camera. You can see it in the aura. They suffer. They suffer. Plants also put all kinds of toxins into themselves to prevent predators like human vegans from eating them. Now, I came to the conclusion after much consideration, because 16 years of vegetarianism and then going to carnivore is not a super easy decision, right? And so I reasoned through the whole thing. And I thought to myself, what diet does the least amount of damage? And it's inevitably the diet that has you eating the least amount of food. And that is hands down the carnivore diet. Some days I eat only one time a day, and you never get hungry. It's really kind of amazing. Everything you're hearing about this diet is true. I'm living testament to it at this point. And if I eat 12 grams of meat in a day, not 12 grams, let's say 12 ounces, or 8 ounces, a steak, or a chicken breast, or 2 chicken breasts, am I really doing more damage to the environment and Mother Nature than the vegan who has to eat copious amounts of food to keep their blood sugar up? Because vegans, they have to eat a lot. Everything they eat is, chickpeas, lentils. If I lived in India I might consider a vegetarian diet, because I think that they're the only ones that have really figured it out. But Western vegetarianism is extremely unhealthy. Most vegetarians end up eating loads of junk food and pat themselves on the back because they're not killing animals. And the ultimate reality is it's impossible to live here without killing things. That the energetic construct of this planet is one of hierarchical consumption. We see that in the natural food chains. You certainly see it in nature. And so the point is to be humane in how you eat. Don't overeat. I think overeating is like a giant fuck you to Mother Nature. I think fat people are just, I don't know, they're just... Anyways, enough about that. So I'm a carnivore now. And I will stick with this diet for some time until it's proven to be somehow defective to me. But so far so good. Your digestive tract completely cleans up. On a carnivore diet, you're pooping like once a week. And it's not because you're blocked up. It's not because there's a big traffic jam of red meat in your intestines. That's not true. Okay? Not true at all. All right. So today I'm going to tell a story. As I said at the beginning, some of you might know a little bit about this story. It goes back to my Rev Radio days. It goes back to 2016 when I invited a Revolution Radio host from Texas over here. He went by the on-air handle of Why Not, which was his Christian name spelled backwards, which is Tony. And his last name was Lopresti. And as I said, he lived in Texas. He was about 11 years older than me. And in the beginning of my adventure over here, there were some things I wanted to do. And I wanted some assistance. I wanted a partner to work with. Now, the immediate downside of Tony, Why Not, was that he had no money. He lived kind of like a bum. And the truth is, I really didn't know how he lived before he came over here. He had fathered a family, was somewhat estranged from that family, or if not estranged, then in a strained relationship with them. Tony was a devotee of a philosophical system of life detailed in a book called The OASP, which is worth reading. And he spoke on radio about ideas of generosity and selflessness and putting other people ahead of yourself and all of these sorts of things. He had some health issues. He had high blood pressure, which I don't really understand if somebody's a vegetarian, how they get high blood pressure, but that's another story. He was an irrepentant, not beyond irrepentant. Irrepentant would mean that somebody knows deep in their heart they need to repent and they're not doing it. That's irrepentant. He was a complete believer in the lifestyle of marijuana. He had been high every day when I met him. So when I met him, he was about the age I am now. He was about 60 years old. I just turned 59. He was already in relatively bad health. But I think a lot of that was from living rough. And so at that time, he had probably been doing drugs. I shouldn't call marijuana a drug. That's a bit harsh. But he did a lot of drugs. He dabbled in heroin, anything, cocaine. If it was there, he would do it. He was one of those guys that, classic hippie, born in, classic baby boomer, but a true baby boomer in the sense that he born in 55, he never converted from the hippie ideal to the material ideal, like all the other ones did, like Jerry Rubin and all, the Chicago 7. If you follow the life, watch documentaries, except for Abby Hoffman, I think, all of those guys went on to be millionaires. Right, Jerry Rubin, all of those radical baby boom activists in the 60s, they all went on to be very well off. And let's not forget that this is the same generation. They gave us the 60s, but they also gave us the 80s. They gave us Gordon Gekko. They gave us predatory capitalism. They gave us all. This is all one generation. Because from the moment the boomers stepped onto the scene, they were pretty much running things. And again, it's not a moral or a character fault on their part. I'm not criticizing them. I don't think anything else could have happened given the demographic anomaly of so many people being born in 15 years, let's say from 45 to 60, which I think to extend the baby boom to 65 is a bit ridiculous. I think it's really from 45 when the soldiers come home and give it 15 years to 1950. And that's the baby boom. No, sorry, 1960. That's the baby boom. So the Woodstock ones and all the hippie ones, they would have been out of the gate baby boomers. They would have been born 45, 46, 47 for them to be in their early 20s at Woodstock, which was, I think, 1969, right? Nonetheless, Why Not was a quintessential baby boomer who never gave up. Very interesting. Very odd fellow physically. He was about 5'1", about maybe 129 pounds, 130, tiny little guy. Angry as all hell. Well, like the first thing I noticed when I met him in real life is that radio voice and that radio personality he does is a psychotic invention. It's not who he is at all. I told him that if he came out here, I would pay for all his food. I would pay for his airfare. I would take care of his marijuana habit, which he said was mandatory to regulate his blood pressure. I subsequently found out that marijuana is one of the worst things you can do for high blood pressure. And since leaving Costa Rica, since leaving Costa Rica, he had 2 heart attacks. Okay. By the way, for those of you who don't know, for those of you who know who I'm talking about, he died last year. He died, I think, I have it right here, actually. I'll check it up. Yeah, so I think he died. Yeah, he died late 2024. If I'm reading a Facebook Messenger thread here. Yeah. Yeah, so I just want to get it, be semi-accurate here. Yeah, hang on. Holy cow, I got to scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll. Oh, there we go. I just see a date there. Anyways, I mean, I'm just scrolling here. This is a long conversation I had with his best friend just before he reached out to let me, November 9th, 2024. Okay, so he died in late 2024, died of cancer. He had been living alone in the woods under a tarpaulin and foraging for his food. I mean, say what you will about the guy, he had a kind of purity that you don't see in many people. And he refused to give up his personal freedom. So I think he was just living out in some like forested area in Texas. Now, his adult daughters had homes, like fully detached homes. He had grandchildren. There was always a place for him to stay, but eventually he'd run afoul even of his own kids. And the reason was the way he took care of himself and his excessive drug use, his like nonstop, all day, every day pot smoking. His daughters didn't think it was good for him, and they didn't think it was good for the grandchildren to be around a guy like that. Anyways, so Tony came over here, and he came over here around beginning of August 2016. I bought his ticket. I met him at the airport. I brought him out to where I was staying. And I wasn't living on the mountain yet. I had only built the roof and the walls for the first house, but I hadn't done the interior of the houses yet or anything. And I wanted to get an energy system up here. And one of the things that sold me on Tony was he told me he could build a gasifier. Now, if you don't know what a gasifier is, you can just look it up. But it's something that can take old wood shards, like just scrap wood. You burn it, and it produces gas. It's a process that the wood, and they're fairly easy to make. And gasifiers were built on top of tractors and farm equipment during World War II because there was an oil shortage. And so farmers adapted by creating gasifiers. Very interesting thing, a gasifier, because you can actually produce a kind of like propane gas from wood. And it's relatively easy to do, but you have to know a few things. You have to know how to weld. You have to know a little bit about metals, like what metal can be used. And so Tony said, look, I can build that for you, no problem. I said, you know, and I was looking at gasifiers on like Alibaba and Amazon, and they were like $1,500 from China and like $3,000 from the United States. And Tony was telling me we could go to a scrapyard. He could buy the stuff and build it in a week. I said, okay, man, that's worth a Spirit airline ticket, food, and marijuana. Come on over for 3 months and let's see what you can do. Well, I'm going to cut to the chase here and just get the main theme of this story out, because you need to know this as I go on. Tony Lopresti is my only, that I know of, my only real and true engagement with a bona fide psychopath. And I don't want to speak ill of the dead, And I'm not trying to get the final word on an argument that lasted almost a decade between him and I. And we'll get into that as the story goes on. But it was one of the weirdest experiences of my life. Like from the moment he moved in with me, I had to go to the corner store. And one of his requirements for living over here and building the gas fire was he only wanted to eat fresh fruit. So I had to go to the market every night and buy like $25 worth of fruit. Fruit's expensive. It will cost you more money to live as a fruitopian than it will as a carnivore. It's kind of amazing, actually. And the store was only about 600 meters from my house. But he insisted I go every night, and he never left the house for the first 3 weeks. He never even went out into the front yard and stood in the sun. He just lived in this little room. I had internet. I gave him a computer to use. But because I come from, let's say, a high efficiency background. Well, I've done a lot of jobs in my life where if you don't work hard, you get fired. And at the time I met Tony, I was working full-time for a bank, which is why I needed a right hand over here to do things. And he immediately demonstrated an attitude of non-cooperation from like the third day in. Complete and total non-cooperation. It was like a hippie stand-in at Capitol Hill. And I'm going, what did I do to deserve this? And the answer, of course, in hindsight, is nothing. He was a psychopath. And if you've never had a genuine encounter, a real encounter with a bona fide psychopath, count yourself lucky. Because everything you hear about these people is true. It's completely true. A psychopath is a psychopath. And I let him settle in for about a week. I fetched his fruit every day. And then after about a week, I started to say, okay, so I had a personal assistant at the time. Her name was Carla Sanchez. And she had sourced scrapyards for us. And so I said, okay, Tony, we have some scrapyards to go to. If you want to get ready today, we'll go and you can pick out the metal and I'll pay for it. And Carla has sourced an arc welder that you can borrow from the town we're living in. One of her uncles or something will loan you an arc welder. It's time to get started on the gasifier. And he wouldn't say anything like, I'm not going to do that. He would say stuff like, well, you don't need me. I mean, anybody could build a gasifier. I'm going like, what is going on here? I said, Tony, I flew you over here. We have this sort of contract in place. You get to spend 3 months in sunny Costa Rica, and all you got to do is build a gasifier. And he had sold himself on Rev Radio as a kind of MacGyver genius, a guy that could do anything. With electricity, with basic mechanical engineering, with any of this stuff. He could do anything. And it was all a lie. He had been completely and utterly lying. I caught him, he didn't know I was listening, but I caught him on Skype a few times, talking to people we knew in common at Rev Radio. Really smart people who really are MacGyvers, trying to get instruction on how to build a gasifier. And I remember thinking to myself, he completely lied to me. And this is the characteristic, the chief characteristic of a psychopath. If I completely lied to somebody and I got caught in that lie, I would be mortified. I would feel ashamed, like a 14-year-old boy getting caught whacking off by his grandmother. I would feel mortified. First of all, I probably wouldn't lie. It's not my nature. But if I did, and I got caught, I would feel mortified. But psychopaths don't feel that. And so when I confronted him on the gasifier, he would just come back with lines like, "You shouldn't have so much doubt in yourself, Bruce. You could do this. It's just going to take a few hours of researching it on the internet. Anybody can learn to weld. It's not a hard thing to do. You can build the gasifier." So he changed it to sound like he was my life coach, helping me overcome a deficit in my character. And this is the psychopath. I said, "It's not a question of that, Tony. I'm working 65, 70 hours a week to pay for this house. Okay? I'm working full time. You hear me in the next room in my meetings. You hear all the stress I go through. For those of you who've ever worked in the financial world, in their various technology departments, which have been around for about 30 years, but going back to mainframes and then everything going to internet in the late 90s, mid-late 90s, and then they're constantly evolving as technology evolves. The banks are constantly evolving. They're one of the most high-stress environments you can work in. People go crazy working at banks. I'm not even joking. They have to be institutionalized. They have to go for a detox at some, and they're very aggressive. It has to do with the way they set up deadlines and everything. I've worked at probably over 30 companies in my life, from small startups to companies as large as General Electric and Siemens. And nobody's ever told me to fuck off, or I've never gotten into an argument in a phone call with anybody except in banking. And it's just something banking does to you. So in Tony's defense, I was a bit of a prickly pear back then. Not the same Bruce is talking to you today, a decade later. Less than a decade. I finished that job in the fall of 2017. But not the same guy at all. At all. And but I could not believe the way he was flipping this back on me. And I said, look, this isn't going to work. After 3 weeks, I sat him down. I said, look, this isn't going to work. I got one other thing you can do. And that is, I wanted to try clay walls in the main house. I wanted to try to build plaster clay walls. It was one of the ideals of, you got to understand that when I started this project and started this adventure, I was very puritanical, kind of like the vegetarianism thing in my meditating life. It's puritanical. You're not thinking clearly. It's like Puritanism is kind of like a faith-based ideology, but it's still not apprehending the truth correctly. And I wanted to do everything as organically as possible. I didn't want to pollute the mountain with concrete and stuff like that. So I wanted to do clay walls on the inside. And I said to Tony, I said, well, you can do this if you want. You can go up there. You got 2 months and 1 week left on your visa. I'll call up. They'll be waiting for you. You can live in the house. And he did. And the house was not ready to be lived in for a normal person. But, I mean, Tony, he had spent some time living inside a tree in the United States. And like I told you, he died in the woods in Texas. He did not like living indoors. You know who he was? Do you guys remember the cartoonist from the 60s and 70s and 80s? He became famous in the counterculture. His name was Robert Crumb. And he did black and white pencil cartoons. And a lot of them were very sexual. He had severe sexual problems. But he created this character called Mr. Natural. This short little dwarfish guy that was bald and had a big white beard. You may have seen him on a t-shirt that says "Keep on Trucking," and they have this little dwarfish guy walking, and they show his side view. That was Tony Lopresti. He was literally Mr. Natural come to life. It was freaky. And he even talked like Mr. Natural. But to the best of my knowledge, he never read Robert Crumb comic books. But I remember noting it. And I wasn't a big Robert Crumb fan when I was a teenager, but I saw a phenomenal documentary produced by David Lynch called Crumb. And I watched it about Robert Crumb and his three brothers and Crumb's life. It was 90 minutes. Came out in like 94, 95. A brilliant documentary if you ever get a chance to see it. And that's how I became familiar with Robert Crumb. And Mr. Natural was his signature character. And why not? Tony Lopresti was such a literal manifestation of that. It's almost like he was templated by the morphic field around us. The same morphic field that lent Robert Crumb the imaginative vision to create Mr. Natural on paper. It's very strange. So then, I made the biggest mistake of all. I sent Tony up to the mountain alone. And I arranged for him to be able to get money every week from a bank account because he had no money. And he ended up, when he came up here, I said, "You're going to have to find someone to work with. You're not that physically strong. I don't expect you to do a lot of work. I know you have a weak heart. But just be there to supervise things and everything." So he ended up working with the only guy on the mountain who spoke a little bit of English. And this guy spoke English because he worked on the tour boats that dock, not tour boats, but cruise boats, that dock at the port of Limon, and he had learned English. And he was one of the four brothers from this family I've described to you before, which has Ramon and Tino and these like insane bachelors. Absolutely insane bachelors up here. And so he brought Hugo in. And then no work got done. And I was paying like $300 US a week, about $1,200 a month, just to have food supplies and everything, to keep this psychopath comfortable. But I didn't know at the time. I hadn't put it together yet that he was a psychopath. And then in the middle of all of this, my best friend died. And I had to go back to Canada for a funeral. And I ended up staying in Canada about 4 weeks. And it was really disturbing when this guy died. And this was my best friend growing up. I met him in the 4th grade. And he died at like 53 years old. He was a year older than me. He died 8 years ago in 2016. I think August 2016. No, September. Yeah. And so Tony was left here on his own up on the mountain, but I could still transfer money from Canada and everything. I went for the funeral. I gave a eulogy. I came back. And then I found out when I got back, because people were calling me, and I found out that this little psychopath had been up here, like unbelievably bad-mouthing me, like to the point of like maybe I could have gotten killed. And it was a passive you know what passive homicide is? Women like passive homicide. They won't actually put the knife into your heart, but they will set up a series of circumstances, not necessarily deliberately, not as deliberate as here's $10,000, I want you to kill my husband. But they'll take a lover on the side and start saying things like, it might be better if he just had an accident. And then when it happens, when the guy does it because he's in love with the crazy bitch, that woman till the day she dies will maintain, I didn't do anything. I didn't kill him. I didn't do anything. I call it female aggression. And I think it's much more dangerous than male aggression. Male aggression you always see coming, and you can diffuse male aggression just by getting your ego out of the way and seeking peace with the person. Female aggression you can't diffuse. It's psychotic, like Tony. And Tony had this very female aggression, like that. Like he had decided karmically, I deserve to be punished for bringing him over here, buying an ounce of weed for him every 2 weeks and keeping him stockpiled in fresh fruit with no productivity to show for it. And it just went on like that. And then when I got back from the funeral, about 3 weeks before Tony was supposed to leave, people started calling me on my Costa Rican number and saying, Bruce, you got to get this guy off the mountain. He's just like, he's fucking crazy. I said, what do you mean? Well, he's going around telling everybody you make $150,000 a year. I said, why would he do that? And the people I was talking to said, the only reason he would do that is to create problems for you. And he was telling people like, well, when Bruce resumes this project and he wants to finish building this house, this is how much people make in construction in the United States. He's only paying you this much. This is how much. It was like a fucking labor activist. And reality is I was paying people about 50% more for day wages than they would make anywhere else. So if the average day wage in 2016 for a Costa Rican laborer was $20, I was paying 30. I had people lined up to work for me. When I had to let people go, when the main heavy stuff was done and we were getting to finishing details, when I was letting people go, they'd practically cry. This is the best job I've ever had. Please don't fire me. And this little fucker is up here trying to sabotage me. Not only that, this is a place where money has a very negative motivation on people. People get kidnapped over here. People get murdered for money. To even tell people how much money I was making at that time was an incredible act of this passive female aggression I was talking about. Anyway, sometime just before I left for Canada for the funeral, I was so confused by this guy, I called his daughter, Tara. And I said, Tara, I don't know what to make of your dad. She says, okay, tell me. I said, is it normal for him to smoke weed all day, every day, at his age with his heart condition? She said, yeah, she said it's a huge problem here in Texas as well. I said, okay, I just didn't want to believe that he was taking advantage of this circumstance to do more drugs or marijuana than he normally does. And she assured me that's his normal volume, and he's been like this for over 40 years. She told me a bunch of stuff. She had a lot to get off her chest. And you could then the cracks started to break in the Tony picture. Anyways, the work never got done up here. He spent all the money on drugs. He actually did heroin a few times up here, which is also very bad because that gets attached to me because I introduced this gringo to the mountain. And they're going to think, well, Bruce probably does heroin too. Let me explain something to you. When you're living in Latin American culture, you want what is called good moral character. You want your neighbors to respect you. You want the church-going folk to respect you. You want the good people to respect you. You want to be with the good people. Because the bad people, and there's a lot of them in Costa Rica, except they never hit the streets like LA or Toronto or Seattle. It never gets that ugly because nature is so abundant here. You can be a crackhead your whole life and eat nutritiously. You just go into the jungle and forage for fruit, or any one of your neighbors will have 5 or 10 banana plants, and there's always food to eat over here. So you can't really starve. And so it creates a unique kind of drug addict over here. Tony fell in love with the life here. This was his Garden of Eden because he loves nature. It's the rainforest. And there's drugs everywhere. There's marijuana growing all over the mountain. And this family I told you about with all the addictions, Tony bonded with that family and used the money I was paying for the work to be done to treat them all to more drugs. And so when I came back up here, it was just a shit show. And everybody came and told me what Tony did. The people who hadn't called me walked over to talk to me and said, this is what happened when you sent that guy up here. And people said to me, where did you meet this guy? Why did you send him here? I said, well, I had never met him in person before. He was a host at a radio station I had a show on. And I'd been listening to his show for about a year. And he sounded reasonable, but was a psychopath. So when he gets back to my house off the mountain, he had to take a bus. And he gets all the way back to the house. He looks at me with these Charlie Manson eyes and says in this voice that did not sound like him. It sounded like a demon voice, and I'm not being hyperbolic. You shouldn't have called my daughter. And I realized immediately that he was upset that I learned the truth about him from the people closest to him, who are not going to lie. And I subsequently learned that I created more problems for him back home when he went back home because I reinforced the family position that there's something wrong with this guy. So it's not just us, his daughters and his stepsons, sons-in-law. I mean, even his own friend from the radio station, after spending 3 months with him, sees him the way we see him. This drove the little psycho crazy, absolutely nuts. And what ensued after that was a 5-year-long obsession with me, defamation of me on the radio, defamation of my reputation and character to anybody who would listen to him in a private conversation who worked at the radio station. And 90% of the people who worked at Revolution Radio smoked pot all day, every day. And generally people are tribal. So that they'll forget moral reasoning. They won't think about what's really correct here. Is Bruce telling the truth? Is Tony telling the truth? They'll just go, I believe Tony, man. He's a good guy. He's not interested in money, man. Why would he lie? He just wants some. He's like the dude in the Dude Lebowski. And this just was a living hell for 5 years. Now, I lived here. It didn't affect me. And there was this constant threat that he was going to return. He was the guy he gave the work to up here who spoke English. He was in constant contact with that guy. They were talking on Skype, and he was promising him all kinds of stuff. And so he was keeping an agent provocateur on the mountain in his absence. And Tony had gotten into his head, and I shit you not, and I'll tell you how I know this toward the end of this podcast, but he had gotten it in his head that he deserved to be on this mountain because he was more like the people that lived here, and I was just an exploitative capitalist who was going to use this place. Well, I mean, it's 10 years later, and I'm finally getting a business off the ground that the natives have been begging me to do for 6 or 7 years. And I wrote 4 books. And I draw all my money in from remote work. And I help people with emergencies. I'm the exact opposite of what he said. And I had never in my life experienced anything like this. And I came to the conclusion that this guy was a psychopath. And he was a psychopath. And then I thought to myself, why did this happen, like karmically, spiritually, Bruce? Why did this happen? And I would tie it to the idea of resistance I gave you in the podcast I did about going to get my fingerprints done. And it was a tremendous amount of resistance when Bob was here as well. Everything we went to do blew up in our faces, and it was spiritual. And you never quite know if that's your karma or the grab bag of entities Bob drags around with him, because Bob's a human portal. When he loses control of himself, he becomes a doorway to another dimension, and shit just walks into this reality. You have to go back to the podcasts I did on human agency to understand what I'm saying here. So I could never quite figure out if it was my karma or if it was Bob or what it was. But Bob is a human portal. And when the demons are operating through him, you feel them. You feel them swimming around like sharks in the ether. And it's really kind of creepy. And Bob told me straight up, most people, I'm one of the only people other than his son, who's able to be around him for more than a few days and not get possessed. Everyone around Bob gets possessed because he's a human portal, organic portal. Or he was. I would hope things are changing now for him. So this campaign of ridicule and harassment and defamation goes on for 5 years or so. And then his health gets worse. He has a heart attack, and he has a second heart attack. The second one is more severe. I think he needed a quadruple bypass. And he started to settle down a little bit, but even that, and I became the focal point. I was his life mission. Hating me was his life mission. And that's when I started to figure out that, okay, Bruce, you've met your first psychopath. Now, I'm going to tell you something about psychopaths that they don't tell you, that the psychologists don't tell you. If Tony had put 1/10 of the energy he put into trying to destroy my reputation, get me off this mountain, get me killed, whatever he was trying to do, if he had put 1/10 of the energy he put into that to actually fulfilling his contract and building a gasifier and doing what he said he was going to do, everything would have been cool. And what I learned about psychopaths is that when they're an active channel is when you're doing something because it's right and correct. Okay, so when I work from my partner in Canada in the business we do together, the grant writing, I'm in active mode. An active mode is a voice that comes from within me and says, Bruce, you gave your word to this guy. This is how you support your family. Do this work. Do it honestly. Do it well. Do it to 100% of your capability. Go over it 4 or 5 times to make sure there's no mistakes. Be a professional, Bruce. And the active character works on it. Reactive energy is when you feel something has been done unjustly to you. And Tony, from his days coming of age, like he would have been 15 years old in 1970. But he had this very much Mr. Natural hippie mentality, fight the man. And when he went into reactive mode, he was like a Wall Street hedge fund manager. 80-hour weeks were no problem for him. But there's no productivity in reactive mode. And I remember noticing that and going, this is the most psychotic thing I've ever seen in my life. Why would somebody put that much energy and commitment? 5 years this went on. You'd think he'd get tired of it. Why would somebody put that much energy and commitment into trying to destroy something or someone rather than putting their energy into trying to build something for themselves? Anyways, I'm going to wind this up. This has already turned into a slightly longer podcast, but when it was absolutely certain that he was going to die, he would not leave the hospital. His best friend, Scott Fisher, who's also now dying of cancer, lives in Pennsylvania, I think around Pittsburgh. Nice enough guy. But he would go on these shows with Tony and join in on denigrating me. He would be like Tony's Ed McMahon. Yeah, that Bruce is a piece of shit and everything. When Tony was dying, he reached out through Facebook Messenger and I spoke to him. He said, Tony's dying. He's not going to come out of the hospital. He's got such and such a cancer and they found it too late. They can't do anything for him. I said, I'm sorry to hear that. And I generally was. I don't wish ill on anybody. He said, Bruce, I also have cancer. I'm dying and there's something I got to say to you. I said, okay. He said, I sincerely want to apologize for what I did to you. You didn't deserve it. I've watched you over the years. I've been listening to the Talamanca review. You're actually a very good guy. I said, well, why did you do it? He said, well, you know, I grew up with Tony. I've known him since the 3rd grade. It's that whole stand by your friends thing. I took his word for what happened in Costa Rica. I said, well, you could have called me up and asked for my version. And based on what I said about the guy on air, it must have struck a note with you and rang as true because you knew the guy. He said, yeah, it did, but still, you know, he was one of my best friends. And I said, okay, you know, it's all good, man. I forgive you. And then he told me some stuff I didn't know. He told me, you got to understand, Bruce, Tony was like for real a little bit crazy. One time about 25 years ago, 30 years ago, so these guys would have been in there around late 30s or mid 30s at that time. Tony took me into a backyard of a house and he told me that he was the reincarnation of Jesus Christ. And Scott said, Bruce, I'm not joking. Like he believes it 100%. To this day, as he's dying in the hospital, he believes it. I said, what do you think of that? And Scott said, well, it's completely fucking crazy. I said, okay, well, we're on the same page there. And then Scott said, I'm just trying to give you some insight into the guy who gave you such a hard time for 5 years and totally used you in Costa Rica and created problems for you in the dream place you went to retire and live. I said, thanks, I appreciate that. He said, there's something else I got to tell you. I said, okay. He said, since Tony got back from Costa Rica, like a couple years, and this never made it to the Revolution Radio crowd or anybody, because, you know, when you're propagandizing, you cover up your own shit so nobody smells it, and you point out your enemy's shit, right? Well, it turns out that one of Tony's daughters had bought a house for her sister and gave it to her. I don't know if it was bought outright or the down payment was made and she just had to pay the mortgage or what have you. I don't know all the details. But the sister who received the house lived a little bit away, and it would take a couple months for them to get in and get their stuff moved and take possession and start living in the house in Texas. And in that interim, Tony went into the house. One daughter bought for another daughter of his, started squatting with no furniture there. And when the daughters found out, they were furious. And they went to talk to him, and he went crazy, cursed at them, became violent, and Scott describes it as almost demonic, and refused to leave. And they had to get the police to throw him out of the house. And he was going to fight it in court. He was going to use antiquated common law squatter rights against his own daughters. And Scott wanted me to know that. And he told me a couple other stories about how psychotically evil Tony could be. He said, in one way, he was one of the nicest and kindest people I've ever known, like that guy you hear on the radio. But his evil side was darker than anybody. It made Charles Manson look like a choir boy. I said, yeah, I picked that up in Costa Rica. And Scott just wanted me to know these things. And this was part of his making peace before he leaves, right? Because he's getting ready to die as well. He didn't want it on his conscience. And so this is the toll I had to pay in this resistance lecture, or this resistance discourse I've given you about how spirituality works. Because of the extreme nature of the freedom and grace I was to receive on this mountain, there was this residual resistance or karma I had to pay, and it manifested as Tony Lopresti. Why not? And it was like a demon. And this is true for the outer life and the inner life. So for those of you who meditate, as you keep going up, you will hit a point where you meet the representative of the negative principality in you. And you will have to fight with that negative principality to go to the spiritual regions. Now, this is not in any way, shape, or form an affirmation of the Gnostic idea of the archons or anything like that, okay? This is just the way consciousness works. And in many instances, it's the purging of your own negativity manifest in your timeline. Just like the shitting and the puking before you go on the ayahuasca trip is the purging of the body before the consciousness is ready to go on its astral journey. And it's the same thing in life. And so I had to deal, and to this day, I've met dark people before. I mean, I've been all over the world, man. I've met triad killers, I've met mafia killers, I've met Hell's Angel killers. There's killers in my family, right? They work with the narco trafficking and everything. They're not psychos, okay? A psychopath is a unique construction. And if this story I've told today resonates with you and you're nodding your head in agreement, then you probably have met a psychopath. But most people never meet one. The vast majority of society never meets a true psychopath. And I did. And it was the final crossing before I could fully spiritually, psychologically, and physically occupy the paradise I created for myself here. And there's that resistance teaching again. I think that's about all I have to say about this. I think I'm going to title this podcast My First and Only Psychopath Experience. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.